Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me again this evening. Again, I'd put it out there what topics you wanted me to cover. There was a variety of different things came up, and what I was looking at in the similarity in the questions was um, this feeling of maybe being destabilized. What I mean by that, I'll just, without mentioning names, but I will give some of the questions. Looking for validation from our parents as children, but only feeling betrayal, things like that. Narcissistic siblings, their behavior towards other siblings. The emptiness felt when the scapegoat or the invisible child finally tells someone. There's a lot of different stuff going on, but as I say, the recurring theme that I was picking up was this idea of feeling destabilized. Now, this is the thing about a narcissistic relationship. In fact, any kind of coercive relationship usually works, if you want to put it that way. It works for them through a process of destabilizing people. Destabilization. Now, if I just made up a word, destabilizing. What I mean by that is over a period of time. Now, it could be an environment we grew up in. It could have been a workplace we've been in, or some group we were a part of. It could have been a relationship with a particular person. But what tends to happen is there's this process where we continually get undermined and we stop trusting ourselves. We kind of lose faith in ourselves. No matter what we do, there's some kind of criticism. Any opinion we have is the wrong one. Especially if it doesn't fit their narrative. But even if it does, it's probably not enough. So another way is like infantilizing you. What I mean by that is sometimes people will pretend that what they're doing is in your own best interest. They're trying to help you. Really, they're taking away your autonomy. They're telling you that they know what's best. A common phrase, I don't know if you ever heard, it's one I used to hear all the time, would be things like, would you not be better? And then you can fill in the blank. As if your own ideas aren't enough. Sometimes you're in a situation or a position with someone where you can't even have an opinion, or you can't come to any kind of decision. They treat you as if you have to run it past them first, like it needs their approval. So again, there's this sense of infantilizing. Mentioned earlier on, there's a lot of criticism as well. Sometimes it is a criticism for your efforts. It is a criticism against your ideas. It is a criticism against even something good you do. It will be, this is a very modern word, it's one I've been using a lot. They find little ways to problematize things. There's something wrong with it. There's something bad about it. You're being selfish. You're being stupid. You're being silly. Again, this kind of criticism. It's really a form of gaslighting where over a period of time, people start to doubt themselves. A lot of the things that would have been done to destabilize you as well are the things you were led to believe, which could have come through the things like the problematizing things, leading you to believe that you are responsible for how they feel, for their actions, and so on. Your own motives are always, there's always like an ulterior motive or something like that. You're being selfish, you're being silly, you're being a lot of this different stuff going on. But one way or another, the long-term impact of being in a situation, an environment, a relationship with someone or some people like that is we become destabilized. When we're destabilized, to a narcissistic person, a coercive, manipulative person, a Machiavellian person, we're easier to control because we lose trust, we lose faith in ourselves. Coming out of that, a lot of this can stay with us. We continually doubt ourselves. Last time I was talking about when we're asking questions like, what should I do? It can be because there could be consequences of whatever it is. We're trying to think of the best way through something or the best way around something. Sometimes it can be because we want something that's easy. if you know what I mean. We want the quick and easy path. Last time I was talking about maybe asking different questions, things like, well, what needs to change? What needs to be different? What is it I need to do? What can I do? How do I do it? Asking questions like that can be difficult. And what we're doing, started doing is we're starting to rebuild a bit of trust, a bit of confidence in ourselves. But over a long period of time, the impact of that destabilization can erode things like our sense of identity, because for a long time, our identity might have been tied up and enmeshed with that person or those people. We start to lose things like our self-esteem, or gain self-confidence, things like that. We second guess, we question ourselves, or the concept of ourselves. With tonight's cough, tonight's drink. Sometimes we struggle to trust even our own perceptions of things, because we were led to believe that good things were bad and bad things were good. So there is that loss of our perception, our identity, and things like that. When we do go to do something, again, we're questioning ourselves. Is it going to be the right thing? Is this going to work out okay? Is this going to offend people? Is this going to hurt people? Because we were led to believe things being problematized, no matter what we did, we had to rely on them to approve it. It leads to a cognitive dissonance as well, because there is part of us that knows right from wrong, okay? Albeit coming out of these situations, there is something to be said for having to recalibrate our moral compass, if you will, because we were led to believe good things were bad and bad things were good. So we need to recalibrate that. We know in our very core something is right, something is wrong, something is good, something is bad, but we may be acting in a way that is different from that. Because what happened in that environment or that relationship, we started to behave in a particular way where we would either get some kind of approval or at least avoid the disapproval and the rejection and the wrath and things like that. This leads to, as I say, the cognitive dissonance, having two opposing beliefs at the same time. It can also lead to, that dissonance can lead to things like anxiety, confusion. When we're faced with a decision, it's not necessarily that we're struggling to make the right one. We just fear making the wrong one. And the expression it's often used is, there's like a paralysis through analysis. We keep thinking over again and again and again, what would the consequences of getting it wrong be? So we kind of get stuck. It can also lead to things like emotional dysregulation. Sometimes, especially if you were in the environment of someone who could not rein it in. They couldn't tell you they were just disappointed at something. It was, what a horrible, horrible, nasty, awful person you are. How could you do this? You know, there's little penguins in the world have a sore foot and you're doing this, that, and the other. What the hell is that just floated past me? Sometimes I swear this place is haunted. Little things float past me. It is an old house, by the way, I should say. So it could well be. Before I go any further, if anyone reminds me at the end of this, I will do my Shaggy from Scooby-Doo impersonation if you're interested. It's one of my favorites. Anyway, going back to the emotional dysregulation, you could well have been in an environment or a situation with someone who, rather than just say they're disappointed, they go into outrage. Rather than just say they disagree, they would berate you for being a horrible, nasty person. They might perform incredible illnesses in front of you. They just want the world to end right now. How could you say something like no? So there's a lot of dysregulation on their part. Sometimes that can leak into us because of that unpredictable behavior, whether it's silent treatment, whether it's rage, whether it's performing the illnesses, or even those little moments of tenderness and generosity and fun, cracking a joke with you and being normal, if you know what I mean. That can lead us to being feeling constantly on edge, being hyper vigilant, trying to read other people's moods, their facial expressions, paying attention to their tone of voice. So we can sometimes as well, we can start to become a bit dysregulated. Feelings and emotions that have been suppressed for so long can sometimes feel overwhelming. Okay, we get, again, chronic anxiety, low mood, things like that. And it's like we're in constant, I don't want to over dramatize it, but it's like our nervous system is in constant survival mode, if I put it that way. We feel very easily triggered. Again, the slightest look on someone's face, we might fear rejection. And they could just have indigestion for all we know, but we're fearing that we're being rejected. We have done something wrong. Okay. It can lead to that destabilizing us, this destabilizing our core. It can also lead to things like us isolating ourselves. We find it hard to trust others. Again, we're in constant state of fight or flight, constantly being triggered, fearing rejection, fearing being told we're bad, we're wrong, whatever. So we're being overly defensive. What sometimes happens is we can isolate ourselves. We don't really mix with others. We're not really interested in new friends. We don't necessarily want a new partner, things like that. Even after a long period of time, we find it hard. We find it hard to mix. We find it hard to trust, is really what I'm saying. And that can make it difficult for us to rebuild a social support network. As I often say, the antidote to toxic people are decent people, but it can be very difficult for us to mix with the decent people if we assume everybody's out to hurt us in some way or another. It can also leave us with maybe a sense of helplessness, because again, no matter what we would have done or said in that situation with that person, we were always led to believe we were the bad guy. We were the villain. No matter what we would have done or said, changed the situation, fixed the situation. No matter what we did, help them. No matter what they demanded, things will be better whenever you're more like this, you're less like that. We give them exactly what they want, but nothing changes. In fact, the demands usually increased. So that can leave us maybe with a sense of helplessness. But it can also sometimes foster maybe a sense of dependency in us. If we're not trusting ourselves, we find it hard to figure something out, figure a way through something. Again, going back to what I said earlier, asking questions like, what should I do? Tell me what to do. Tell me what I should do. I struggle with that question. Sometimes it's not a bad question, because there are sometimes we really do need to, depending on the situation, it could be a medical thing, a legal thing, something like that, and there needs to be a best course of action. But other than that, we're using the word should as if there's this fear of doing something wrong. So it can lead to that dependency. There are other things I could talk about that it can cause in us, things it can bring up in us, that sense of destabilizing. But something to think about to maybe help to stabilize yourself. And again, it's not necessarily that you shouldn't ask for input, feedback, a little bit of advice, reassurance, and things like that. We're human beings, we're social creatures. There's nothing wrong with that. But some ideas to help to stabilize yourself is to, first of all, acknowledge what it was you went through wasn't okay. It was crap. It was horrible. And it would have had this impact on anybody. It hurt. It hurt like hell. You were maybe constantly lied to, you were abused, you were rejected, you were all of those things. You were, again, acknowledging things like you were led to believe that you cannot make decisions. You were led to believe that you need someone else's approval for pretty much anything. You were led to believe that you're inept. You were led to believe you're a bad, horrible person. Going back to what I said earlier on about maybe recalibrating your moral compass, recognize you were led to believe by these things, led to believe these things by someone who may have had a very kind of dubious relationship with morality, if you want to put it that way. Because on one hand, they're maybe preaching to the world on social media and in their local church or their community group or whatever, in the workplace in front of other people, what great people they are, and they, you know, they do this and they believe in the other thing and they're so upstanding and moral. And yet behind closed doors and when no one's looking, they are just a selfish twat. Okay. You won't find the word twat in the DSM. I would like to try and get it in there, though. I think it's a good word to use sometimes. But that's all they were. So there's a very kind of shady, dubious kind of relationship with things like morality. So again, acknowledging that it wasn't okay. It wasn't all right. This was a person who tried to deconstruct you and recreate you into something that was a lot more usable for them, a lot more malleable, if you will. They tried to turn you into a minion or something. I don't know. That was not okay. Acknowledge it. And also acknowledge that it hurt. Betrayal is not nice. If you were betrayed, betrayal is not nice. And it doesn't, when I say betrayal, it doesn't mean they had to cheat on you, they were seeing other people. But betrayal in the sense that every promise they made, how many of them did they actually deliver? How many did they actually give? Not just maybe once in a while as a little breadcrumb, but just a little bit at a time. Just enough to keep you reeled in. How many lies did they tell you? They tell you one thing and 10 minutes later, it's like they've forgotten that you said it. They assumed that you were stupid, that you wouldn't remember, you know. Engage in little things in order to help stabilize yourself. First of all, as I say, recognize it wasn't okay and it was a process over a period of time. But another thing to think about is engage in little things like self-compassion, okay? Everybody views this differently, so it's entirely up to you. I would never say you're right. I'd never say you're wrong. But to acknowledge something like, sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. Not that we did anything wrong, but maybe that we gave someone or some people more chances than they deserved. Doesn't mean we did anything wrong, but sometimes we have to acknowledge that. Challenging some of those things that were programmed into you, that you're not enough, you're not good enough. Remind yourself that you are. I like the work of Steve DeShazer and Inso Kim, solution-focused therapy, because what they talk about are exceptions. In therapy, it's always, people think it's always talking about the bad stuff, the difficulties, the stress, the strains, the struggles. Their approach to therapy is very good. They had a sort of a paradigm shift. You start to explore the things, the exceptions, the times when things weren't crap in your life, the times when you've interacted people who were decent, the times where you were able to say no and people listened and they respected it, the times when you did come out on top. It's worth paying attention to those times and to recognize there are different people in your life and different environments and situations where you are enough, you're more than enough, and you're accepted just as you are. It's worth paying attention to those things, little bits of self-compassion. My notes are all over the place tonight. I just threw one away and I didn't, because there was one thing I wanted to mention. And that was to rebuild trust in your own sense of reality. Okay? And how we do that? I'm very thirsty tonight. Coke's probably not the right thing to drink because it's a bit too sugary. It should be water, but sure, there we go. A way to rebuild your reality. Some people find journaling helpful. Again, it's their own handwritten evidence. But even if you were to write something down, you write it. No one ever has to read it, by the way. You don't have to share this with anybody. You write down what it was happened even if it was years ago, and you write it down factually, you know, as in what was said, what happened, where it was set, and things like that. Certainly write about what came up for you at the time, what you were thinking and feeling, and so on, but writing it down factually as what actually happened. Again, it's your own handwritten evidence. You read that back to yourself. It's like looking at it from a distance, okay? Sometimes it loses its power, okay? It's not internalized anymore. I always say we've got a head like a TARDIS. It's so much bigger on the inside. You read it back to yourself. Sometimes it loses its power, but you read it back to yourself. You're reading it, you're looking at it from a distance, you're looking at it from the outside. And as you're reading it, there is going to be part of you that's going to read that and say, that was absolutely insane. That was incredible. That was whatever, okay? You're seeing it as it is, okay? And again, that part of you, your moral core, is going to know whether it was good or bad, whether it was right or wrong, whether it was okay or whether it wasn't. It restores, I wouldn't say it was restore. Let me put it another way. It can combat your self-doubt. When you're reading it back to yourself, you're seeing it as it is. When it's in your head, again, it's going all over the place. Sometimes we go in many different directions. We ruminate over these so many different interactions. We start asking more and more questions. We're asking the whys and why this and why that and why was I not able to and why would they do this, that, and the other. When you're reading it back to yourself, you're challenging that self-doubt that you had because you're reading it factually. Okay, it's your own handwritten evidence, as I say. It's something you could even do in the here and now. You might not have contact with that person. You might not have seen them for years. Maybe you just see them occasionally. But you can still do it today. What comes up for you every time there's an interaction? Again, no one ever has to see it. No one but you. But it's a good way of keeping yourself grounded. Now, an example, I'm just thinking of an example. Let me see. Met this person on Saturday. We went for a coffee. And I ordered an American. I ordered a latte, and just as I'd ordered the latte, they started to give me a lecture on, I don't know, third world economics or something, or how milk is bad for you, or you know, something crazy like that. That's what happened, okay. But you also know there's that part of you that knows this was more a lecture. This was problematizing something again. You're doing something wrong by ordering a coffee or a particular coffee, or, you know, they're talking about how, I don't know, a mocha java is problematic because it's only ordered by people with a particular kind of ego or something. Okay, you know this is nonsense. This is just about trying to make you feel bad for having a particular preference for a coffee. You're reading these things back. You're saying it to yourself. You're saying it for what it is. You're not feeling bad about it for days, weeks, months later. Okay. So journaling can be a good way of rebuilding your trust in yourself and in your reality. Go back to what I said at the very beginning of this. Recognizing it's not okay to be judged harshly or criticized for having a different taste or a different preference to someone else. You know that already. It's just you might be in the environment or a relationship with someone who doesn't see it that way. You have to comply. You have to be like them. Something that the journaling can also help with, not instead of, but alongside, are just things like little grounding exercises. If you find yourself being triggered by this person or by any other person, you acknowledge, this is what this is bringing up in me. This is what I'm feeling right now. And again, just because we're triggered, it doesn't mean we have to leap straight to 100. We can go to maybe a 10 or a 20, okay, which is different from going straight to survival mode. What we start to do, practicing those grounding techniques, is to recognize, right now I happen to feel anxious, right now I happen to feel challenged, right now I feel criticized, whatever it is. You bring up what it is, you acknowledge what it is. You're not fighting against it. What you're doing is you're allowing it to inform you, okay? A few live streams ago, I think it was. I talked about different questions to ask, different things to do, rather than you explain why you're ordering a particular coffee, rather than you explain why your boundaries are important, rather than you explain why you think something is a good idea, you give them their own work to do. You ask them to explain why they think your boundaries aren't important. You ask them to explain why it's any of their business what kind of coffee you drink. You ask them to explain whatever their perspective is. Now, chances are you will probably get some kind of convoluted explanation about how there's, I don't know, sea lions somewhere in the world are rolling about in misery because of you drinking a particular coffee. You're going to get something, but you don't own any of that. You just let them do their own work. Said earlier on, whenever we feel destabilized, we can sometimes find it hard to trust people. It is important to try to connect with people you do trust. Now, we're not always going to trust everybody to the same degree and in the same way. Some people you will trust to tell them your first name. There are other people you would trust to give them your front door key if you were going on holiday, to pop in and feed your goldfish and stuff. Different kinds of trust, okay? We don't always have to lay everything out there. We don't have to wear our heart in the sleeve. We don't have to share everything. But when we reach out to, again, decent people that care about us, now that could be family members, it could be friends that you lost contact with because of these people, this person or these people. It could be people you meet on online forums. Again, you don't want to be sharing too much information, but they are supportive, they're encouraging, things like that. It could be whatever little community group, church group, club, book club or something, whatever it is. Just people that are going to treat you decently. And over time, build trust, build relationships. We don't have to jump in, give all our information, tell our life stories, things like that. No, just little bits at a time. We get to know each other. We start to connect and reconnect with decent people. And the last thing I will say about having maybe a little bit of faith in yourself can be to practice a little bit of humility. Not the humility that may have been programmed into you by those narcissistic people, that you don't know anything. You can't do anything. Everything you do is wrong. Everything you do is problematized. You have to accept that they know better than you. Other people know better than you. You're clearly a fool, whatever. Or you've been infantilized. You're just a child. You don't know what you're doing. Have some real humility, okay? In other words, give yourself permission to make mistakes and get it wrong. I know some mistakes are going to have greater consequences than others. So I don't mean be reckless. Get it wrong. Make a mistake. You have to choose a phone. Is it the iPhone or the Android? Pick whatever one you like. If it's not as good, if it works out that you would have preferred the other one, what have you lost? You've got a contract with a phone that's going to last a couple of years. You're going to get to change it again anyway. It's not yours for the rest of your life. And chances are it's working fine. It's going to do exactly what it's meant to do. Give yourself permission to disappoint people by telling them no. I always say that when people learn to respect your no, they appreciate your yes a lot more. Okay. So have some humility. Recognize we don't know everything. We can't do everything, and we might need guidance, help, support in certain areas. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. That doesn't mean we can't do anything. It doesn't mean we're not capable. It doesn't mean that we can't learn. Okay. So that was looking at the destabilizing effects of being in a relationship, being in a long-term narcissistic environment relationship. Looking at the questions from earlier, some of the questions: what is going to happen if a situation where someone is like this, or a situation where this is happening? Regardless of the situation, and regardless of whether the person has a diagnosis of something or not, or whatever it is, doesn't matter. Just pay attention to the repeated patterns of behavior. Okay. How does this person react when? How have they always reacted whenever, say, they're challenged, or someone else is doing well, or someone new comes on the scene? How do they act? Pay attention to those long-term repeated patterns of behavior, regardless of the situation, because what you'll see are patterns. More often than not, they will just act the way they always have. For instance, a new person comes on the scene, they're charming, they're wonderful, they're really nice, they're maybe curious, they want to get to know them. As soon as their back's turned, they're stabbing them or something, stab them in the back, gossiping about them. Didn't mean not literally violently, you know what I mean? Do they always present this public image, this public face? If they are greedy and if they are selfish, something comes up and happens and there's an opportunity for advancement or money or whatever, chances are they're going to do the same thing. So you pay attention regardless of the personality type, the personality construct, whether there's a diagnosis or not. If they have a history of lying, expect them to lie. If they have a history of cheating, expect them to cheat. If they have a history of behaving as if they're entitled, expect them to behave as if they're entitled. Even if there has been distance between you. I always tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, that depending on the person, of course, and the situation, I give people the benefit of the doubt that they can change. Sometimes, the number of times I've been let down, by the way, I couldn't count, but I give them the benefit of the doubt that they are capable of change. Sometimes all you'll find is all they've done is change their tactics to do the same thing. Other times, what you might find is within 2 minutes of speaking to them, they have not changed at all. When it comes to something like narcissistic personality, you have to remember they believe they're fine as they are. They don't need to change. It's everybody else who needs to change. So even if there has been a little bit of distance between you, whether that's time, geography, whatever. Geography, is that the right term? Distance anyway. If they wouldn't change the whole time you were with them, why would you expect them to change now that you're apart? Chances are you're just going to get the same stuff over and over again. Maybe different ways of doing it. I have no idea how I got onto that, but that's just the way my mind wanders. So yeah, we can give someone the benefit of the doubt. Doesn't mean we're going to openly trust them. We're not going to, open our arms, welcome them back, and we're going to do exactly the same things that we've always done. Not necessarily. We can give them the benefit of the doubt, but let them show us that there's been change. Long-term, consistent pattern of change, not just a one-off. They've stopped calling you a horrible name or something, whatever. Not just that. So, again, going back to this thing about having a little bit of faith in yourself, maybe trust in yourself, depending on the situation, there are always going to be consequences, but sometimes you do have to give yourself permission, make mistakes, get it wrong, learn from those mistakes. That's where I was going with this. Narcissistic people don't learn from their mistakes because they don't believe they've made mistakes. Okay? Someone else has done something to sabotage them or something. They picked the wrong phone, and it's because of the person in the shop that showed them both, So on to questions. And as always, go back to the beginning. And if anybody has any questions, if you can put question marks on it, I will know what I'm looking for. Other than that, I'm probably just going to be reading people's conversations with each other, which isn't always a polite thing for a gentleman to do. So let's have a look at questions back to the beginning. I'm not sure the context of this. I feel like it's just a horse of a different color. I'm not sure what that means. Right, okay. Where are we looking for questions? B says, I was led to believe I was able to do anything for myself. Now I finally broke away, and the only thing that held me down was the fear was being projected onto me to chain me down. You're right. It's a form of conditioning. It's projected onto us. What we have is, as Richard Grannon talks about, the super ego injunctions. Our super ego, some people refer to that like our conscience, and it can be, but sometimes it gets hijacked and reprogrammed by the manipulative people in our lives that will lead us to believe that whatever it is we do is going to be bad. Carl Rogers would have called it our conditions of worth. When you were in that situation, when you were in that environment, it's where were you getting your worth from? And it's usually through complying, doing what you're told. It was bad for me to do anything in my own best interest. It was bad for me to expect this. It was bad for me to ask for that. But it was good for me to sacrifice. It was good for me to whatever. So there are the conditions of worth. As I say, they can stay with us quite a while, which is why I've heard this mentioned. And the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm reading about it, the more I see this. Sometimes coming out of a narcissistically abusive relationship, a long-term one, can sometimes it be like deprogramming someone who had been in a cult. Okay, because a lot of this stuff is hardwired into them. It's drummed into them, and it's not just told to them, it's actually demonstrated and shown to them. And coming out of that, a lot of this stuff can stay with us. So it can be a little bit like deprogramming. Okay, so when we get back to this. Man, July sounds like Darren is describing me. Not sure what bit that was. So narcissism is simply amoral. Carol, I think you're onto something there. It is amoral. It's not an immorality. It's a lack of morals, rather. It's believing themselves to be right. Some believe themselves to be self-righteous, I guess. Not just religiously or spiritually, whatever, but no, they believe they have the answers. They know the way. They are right and righteous. It's like you can do something and they will tell you it's bad, but they're doing the same thing and they'll tell you it's good. The thing about narcissistic relationships, and you lose your sense of reality through all the gaslighting. Up becomes down, left becomes right, right becomes wrong, black becomes white. It's your sense of reality becomes hijacked, if you will. Where did we get to? Again, looking for questions. So more time says, I call it a tool. They treat you like a tool. Many do. They value you based on your usefulness to them. What can you do for them? What can you give them? And if they can get that somewhere else, they'll leave you alone until they need you again. Yeah. Relationships can be transactional, the surface level, that's for sure. There isn't a lot of depth to them. But it's really about how useful you are to them. What can they get from you? Dimitri the Monk says, it's not the on-off thing itself. It's how do you react to it. Eventually you just stop. Like you're familiar with the learned helplessness. The key term is learned helplessness, okay? Some situations we may be helpless in the sense that we can't change them, we can't do whatever, we can't fix people, whatever. But a lot of the time it is a learned helplessness that we can't trust ourselves. We don't know what to do. We need someone's approval for anything that we do. And the learned helplessness can be an outcome of what I mentioned earlier about them infantilizing you. Okay. Strange, curious thing about a narcissistic relationship is they will treat you like you are the parent who is supposed to look after them and give them what they need and do things for them and support them and encourage them. So on one hand, they make you their parent, and yet they will behave like they are the parent over you. So it's a strange kind of bloody mess that's going on in some of these relationships. Head like a tortoise, yeah. Barrow Wright says, I did this journal, a list thing, Darren. I wrote down quotes on the front of a book so I could reread them if ever I thought I can cope with this. Yeah. It's the thing about coping strategies, something I talk about even with my own people that come to see me for therapy. I'm all in favor of coping strategies because God knows I use tons of them myself. But the thing about a coping strategy, it's not there to take anything away. For instance, a coping strategy for anxiety, it is not there to take the anxiety away. What it is there to do is to make it more bearable and make it easier, slightly easier for you to cope with whatever it is you're going through. So it's not to make something easy, just to make it easier, to make the distress level a bit more manageable. And whenever we're using them and we pay attention to them, what happens is our tolerance for distress, first of all, it starts to increase. Another thing that starts to happen is the feeling itself doesn't go away, but it starts to dilute because our tolerance is increasing. And so we start to become a bit more confident. We start to become a little bit more courageous. But that takes place over a period of time. And that's one of the things the coping strategies are useful for. It's also about practicing them. It's not like James Bond being given a funky gadget and he uses it the once to get out of a situation, never uses it again. That there's something that we keep continually practicing and we learn to adapt them as well. And after a while, we don't need them anymore because, as I say, we've grown in confidence and so on. But again, my mind wanders. I don't know how I went on to that. Let me see. I don't understand how trust in your own sense of reality matters when they are living in a fantasy land and they will die on that hill. Well, if I understand your point, and forgive me if I don't get it right, it matters in the sense that they might die on a hill. You don't have to die on it with them. It's their hill. Why would you die on someone else's hill for something you don't even believe in? Your sense of reality is important. It keeps you grounded, keeps you in the here and now. It's as mentioned earlier, it's like your sense of morality, right and wrong, good and bad. It's your sense of what's real in this world. For instance, we're led to believe that we are responsible for what other people feel. Well, what we cannot do is we can't throw rocks at people and say, it's not me that's hurting you, it's the rocks. So we take responsibility, but that's different from being responsible. Narcissistic people will exploit your empathy and your compassion. They will exploit your sense of guilt. They will exploit your fear of public opinion. They will exploit your sense of duty, obligation, things like that. And they believe they're entitled to, by the way, in order to get what they want. That is the hill they will die on. Why would you want to die on that hill with them? Why would you want to collude with that? I'm not sure if I've addressed that, but it's just what came to mind just as I was reading that. So something else came up. You mentioned fantasy. Yes, your sense of reality is recognizing that it is a fantasy. Okay, it is a fantasy. It is a dream. It is not real. It's hard to sometimes know the difference. Is it delusion or is it denial? Sometimes it's maybe both. But recognizing it is a fantasy. Yeah. So let me get to. Okay, again, people are chatting away with each other, which is kind of nice. I like that. Let me see. Okay. Oh, got a question here. Oh, but it wasn't for me. But I'll answer it anyway. I don't see detaching from harmful people as a problem. I don't care if I'm blamed by them. Why do you? I'm not sure what the question was. I'm not sure who you're talking to, but I would say, yeah, if you're going to detach from a harmful person, chances are you are going to be blamed. you're a horrible person, you don't care. I always say you're always going to be somebody's villain, somebody's story. Just don't be the villain that they say you are. Remember, every billionaire madman who lives in a hollowed out volcano who's trying to take over the world, remember James Bond is the bad guy. So be the bad guy. Just don't be the bad guy they say you are. So let me see where we get to. Hello, Ellie. Hello, Carol again. So, let me see. I've just seen a highlighted question, but it's jumped, so I have to find it again. Where did it get to? And it was, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Dimitri the monk asks, do you think narcissism is genetic? According to the research, it's a bit of both. There used to be the age-old question about nature versus nurture. Is it nature or is it nurture? Apparently, it's a bit of both. It could be genetic in the sense that it's come from the parents. I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, so I'm guessing when I say this. Sometimes some of these things can maybe skip a generation. Could be. Sometimes it just comes directly from the parents. That being said, there is also environment at play, because it's some of it, a lot of it's learned behavior. But then you might get both together, and I think where we get both together is largely what we see being played out in the relationships, largely what we see being played out in society as well. So it's a bit of both. I'm not sure what the percentage is, maybe about 50-50, but that is my best guess. So there is a genetic component to it, but there is also an environmental component to it. It's the upbringing, it's the learned behaviors and things like that. So where do we get to? Oh, Carl's answered is part nature and part nurture. Carl, you answered that a lot more succinctly than I did. I should get you to host this for me. I can take the evening off. Where do we get to? How do I break away from the conditions? Well, it depends on what conditions you're talking about. From the conditioning, maybe, if that's what you meant. I'm guessing because I'm not quite sure the question. First of all, it's like I say, ground yourself in reality. Recalibrate your moral compass, engage with decent people, even small little minor interactions, people that treat you decently. As a therapist, I would say your first port of call is to talk to a therapist, to talk to a counselor, regardless of their approach, whether they're CBT, person-centered, psychodynamic, solution-focused, whatever it is. You might not get what you want. And the first, let me start that again. Sometimes you might have to see a few therapists before you get one that you maybe feel comfortable working with, or maybe has an approach that suits you. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. But a lot of the work we do in therapy comes down to the therapeutic relationship, okay? The first port of call is to see a therapist, to talk to a counselor, to talk through what happened, to pick apart what happened, to maybe get to understand yourself a bit better, maybe understand them a bit better, what might have been going on with them, but the impact of their behavior that had on you, to maybe understand that a bit better, but also to find better ways of coping with things and finding ways forward in life. There's a lot of different stuff you can do in therapy. To recognize that, again, I mentioned earlier, some of those in superego injunctions, some of those conditions of worth, sometimes it can feel like we're doing something bad or something wrong, even by talking about how that person behaved. because while we were with them, it was maybe programmed into us, we better not ever mention anything, we better not tell anybody about them. So we might feel as if we're doing something a bit naughty, even telling a therapist. But what we do is we start to break the conditioning a little piece at a time, okay? A little step at a time. Therapy can help with that. Interacting with other people can help with that. Doing little things in your own best interest can help. Learning new things, new skills, lots of different things you can do, but it is a little piece at a time. And you pay attention as you're doing it. You pay attention. Don't force anything, but you pay attention to the little, small, subtle changes that might be taking place over a period of time. So where do we get to? Not sure if you've discussed the link between Hello, Christopher. Not sure you discussed the link between narcissistic abuse and clinical depression. This thing about clinical depression, narcissistic abuse can. The sense of helplessness, the sense of hopelessness is the anxiety a lot of the time, and the anxiety and the low mood, the depression. That can certainly be an outcome of long-term narcissistic abuse. Clinical depression, I think, is something different. Again, I think it's something that's diagnosable, and there can be a lot of different things going on there. Sometimes it's maybe diagnosed through a medical model. Okay, if I'm working with people and there is low mood and there is depression, what I have noticed a lot of the times, not all of the time, certainly not all of the time. I think I talked about this a week or two ago when I was talking about anger. Sometimes the depression can be something like internalized anger. We're angry at the way we're being treated. We're angry and we feel frustrated, and no matter what we do is changing anything, is helping anything, is fixing anything. Sometimes we even get angry with ourselves. But one way or another, whenever we feel we can't do anything with the anger because we've been programmed, we've been conditioned, we have been lied to, we've been led to believe that anger is a bad thing. Well, it's not. It's a perfectly normal, healthy thing to feel. We were led to believe it was bad because we're sometimes confusing anger with things like aggression and rage. But they're different things. But we feel angry. Get to my original point. God, I don't have waffle. We feel angry, but it doesn't go anywhere. It gets internalized. We had to suppress our own pain. We had to suppress a lot of different things. And when we internalize something like anger, we ruminate, we go over it again and again, we replay it over and over again. We think there's something wrong with us for feeling this way. Over a period of time, different things start to happen. And most commonly what happens is it becomes very dulled and it tends to come out as depression. It's a school of thought that believes that a lot of the time depression is internalized anger, that it has to come out somehow. So it's coming out and it has that sense of hopelessness, but there's also anxiety often goes hand in hand with it. So you get a sense of feeling both helpless and hopeless at the same time. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I'm talking about depression as opposed to clinical depression. It would be interesting. You've actually, do you know what? I'm actually going to write that. Forgive me a moment. I think it would be interesting to have a look. See, is there a link between clinical depression and narcissistic abuse? So I hope that's answered at least something. Where do we get to? More questions. Let me see, because I'm coming towards the end. It's nearly my bedtime, folks. Let me see. Okay, Barrow says, question, Darren, any tips for any recovery from having to leave other vulnerable people behind? That That is an incredibly powerful question. It's one that I never even considered. A lot of the stuff. Having to leave vulnerable people behind with the abuser to save myself. I don't even know where to begin with that. What comes up for me as I'm reading that is, what I'm wondering, is there a sense of guilt, feeling that you've maybe done something wrong? Depending on what we mean by vulnerable, I guess. Each situation is going to be difficult or different, and each relationship is going to be different as well. When we say vulnerable, in what way are they vulnerable? Because they could be vulnerable because, oh, I don't know, they're dependent on that abuser for something. They might not. It depends. I guess what I'm getting at is it really depends on the level of risk. If they're just going to be subjected to temper tantrums, manipulation, and things like that, you know what that's been like. That's been painful for you. Do you still have a relationship with those people? Are you still in contact with them? Because they can keep you updated on how they're doing and so on. I mean, if there is going to be some kind of like physical risk or something, violence or whatever, that's something completely different. That's a whole different level of fish. That's when you're maybe kettle of fish, rather level of fish. That's when maybe, you know, the appropriate agencies and so on need to be involved. It really depends, but the big thing that's coming up is maybe your sense of guilt in order to save yourself. In what sense? Think about in what sense are they vulnerable? Do you still have contact with them? And if so, can they keep you updated on how they're doing? Is it maybe someone that was maybe a bit younger than you, which means sooner or later they're going to grow up and they'll maybe be able to move on themselves? It really depends on the situation. I cannot give a definitive answer to that, but it is an incredible question to ask. It's just one of those questions that I don't think there's one answer is actually going to answer it. To do something to save yourself is not necessarily a bad thing, I would say, because sometimes we'll have to look after ourselves to be able to look after other people. Okay. We get to Dimitri says exactly that. It's so weird. Oh, you're okay. Laura's asking, is parentification common with a covert narc parent? I would say, yeah, it's probably, yeah. You think of parentification, not necessarily covert. It can be covert. It's probably more covert kind of tactic, if you know what I mean. But not just exclusive to covert narcissism. Parentification can take place where there's maybe an addiction or some other kind of mental health problem. And it's really just when the child has to grow up too quickly, put it that way. But when it comes to narcissism, yeah, it's not uncommon. The parentification of the child. The partner's no good, partner's horrible, partner's mean. And the child takes on like substitute role of the partner. We get to okay, any more questions just as I come towards the end? Okay, I think I've got a lot of comments, but not necessarily questions, which is okay. I've no guilt for leaving. Spent 2 years wearing myself into the ground protecting her, and I was about to have a breakdown myself, unable to protect her anymore. It doesn't sit well, but sometimes we do have to acknowledge our own capacity. None of us are invincible. Doesn't sit well, but sometimes we just have to be honest with ourselves. The other thing is sometimes, and it depends on the situation, and I don't know your situation, the one you're talking about. I really don't know, so I'm not trying to comment on that. But sometimes we try to rescue someone who doesn't want to be rescued. You imagine you meet someone, you start dating someone, and you find that their family is very controlling, narcissistic, things like that. And it's like we've found someone who's really nice and decent and good, and we think that we can help them, we can fix them, and we can take them away from this, and we can show them that there is a better way of being. They don't have to be afraid. They don't have to suppress themselves. They don't have to do whatever. It's normal to them, and they don't want to leave. They're in their own way. They're narcissistic as well, but maybe a bit more maybe covert about it. They're fine as they are. They don't want to leave. They're okay living within that cult system, and that can break our hearts. That can really, really hurt us. So sometimes we try to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. It's common with covert narcissism. Covert narcissists often play victims and things like that. They're helpless, they're vulnerable, and all that. And no matter what you do, nothing ever works. Every solution has a problem. Every silver lining has a cloud, and you can wear yourself out. So, where do we get to? It's just past 9:30. I hope you found something useful in this evening. Remember, as going back to the beginning, about how we have been destabilized in these situations and these relationships, how that stays with us afterwards, where we might still be second guessing ourselves, doubting ourselves, and wondering what to do about this, that, and the other thing, and constantly needing reassurance and things like that. And just some ideas to help maybe bring yourself back into reality, maybe trust yourself a little bit better. Said it during the live stream, I'm going to say it again. Good place to start is therapy. Get yourself a therapist. Go and talk to a therapist. Even if you have to talk to 3, 4, and 5 until you find the one that you really feel can help you, the one that gets you, the one that you feel comfortable working with. Keep doing until you find someone. Okay. Tomorrow, video coming out. Revisiting something I talked about 2 or 3 years ago. I talked about ostracizing. I called it. It's a very insidious form of abuse. It's abusing someone without actually saying a word to them. Oh, could I talk about narcissistic fleas in another video? I haven't, but I will. That's a good question. Thank you, SH. Or shh, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Narcissistic fleas. Yeah, I'll talk about that. So yeah, I talked about ostracism. I called it. It's a form of abuse where they don't actually say a bad word to you. So I thought what I would look at is the long-term impact of being ignored and being abused, because it's something that I'm looking at more and more recently. The more I'm reading about it, I'm looking at there's a very dark side to loneliness. It can have a huge impact on people in ways that it is a problem. It can be a difficult problem for a lot of people. But there is a very dark side to it. Whenever something is inflicted on someone where they are deliberately ignored and excluded and they're ostracized, they're treated like they just don't matter, there are long-term impacts on this for someone. So tomorrow's video is going to look at the long-term effects of being ignored, treated like you don't exist, and just a couple of little ideas to maybe help with that. So that will be out tomorrow evening. I do hope you find it interesting. I do hope you find it helpful. And as always, thanks for joining me, and I will see you all again next week. Again, I will put it out there, what topics questions you might like me to cover, and we'll see where we go from there. Okay. Bye, everybody.